welcome to the British Museum's Knowledge Share Spring Event Series 2021. These events seek to build on some of the conversations that were held at our National Programmes Conference in 2019, which explored equality and diversity in UK museum practice. We're delighted to host so many contributors from across the UK's cultural heritage sector, including several returning speakers from our 2019 conference. I'm grateful to the Vivmar Foundation for their long-term and valuable support of the Knowledge Share program, which has made these events possible. And I thank you all for joining us as we explore the ways in which museums and heritage organizations have adapted to the profound changes of 2020 and look ahead to the changes yet to come.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's brilliant to have so many of you here. I'm just going to run through some housekeeping before we can get started. So this session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the BM Events YouTube channel afterwards, so you can catch up on anything. But for now, we're filming live and we'd love for you guys to get involved. So the chat function is open. Please do get the conversation going. We want to create a safe environment for discussion and sharing ideas. So please follow the museum's code of conduct, which is protect privacy, please don't share anyone's personal information, stay on topic, and please be respectful. So I'm sure you're looking forward to getting started. So I'm going to hand over to Afzal, who will introduce our brilliant speakers to the stage.
Hello, I'm Afzal Khan and I will be your host for today. Welcome to the 8th event of the Knowledge Share Spring Event Series. Thank you for joining us. Please do get comfortable as we're in for a treat. Today's event is being led by colleagues from the University of Cambridge Museums Consortium, who are going to talk about their groundbreaking museum remix project, which they describe as an experiment in museum storytelling where the museums hand over the authorial reins to their audience and participants. We are joined by George, Jasmine, Nikki, and Hannah, who will be leading the session today. George is a senior member of the Fitzwilliam Museum's digital team and also works across the University of Cambridge Museum supporting digital engagement. One of her key interests in exploring how digital tools can be leveraged to privilege underrepresented narratives in museum context. She is chair of the UCM's Changemakers Action Group, championing equality, inclusivity, and relevance across the consortium. Jasmine co-leads the front of house team at the Fitzwilliam Museum and represents the Fitzwilliam on the UCM Museum's Changemakers Action Group. She was a founding member of the UCM's Bridging Binaries volunteer tour guide cohort and has been involved in the Museum Remix program since 2019. Nikki is Opening Doors coordinator for UCM and has been in position since 2015. Her role involves helping to create opportunities for everyone to get involved in museum activities across the university, museums, and the Botanic Garden, including work experience, paid internships, apprenticeships, placements, and volunteering. Hannah is the UCM program coordinator, working across the 8 university museums and Botanic Garden. Her role includes advocacy and communications, supporting inclusivity and equality across the consortium, and coordination of the Museum Remix program. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please do send them in using the Q&A function. I'll come back on screen at the end of the presentation to put your questions to them. A warm welcome to George, Jasmine, Nikki, and Hannah. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Afzal, and thank you everyone at the BM for hosting us today. It's really lovely to come back. We spoke at the conference back in 2019. Oh, happy days. So it's lovely to come and carry on the story. I'm just going to ask everyone to say hello. Hello.
Oh, hello.
They're like,
Hello.
Oh, don't be so cringy, Hannah. Okay, so we are from the University of Cambridge Museums, and there are 9 members of our consortium. So all of them belong to the University of Cambridge. They were all founded from between about the 18th and the early 20th century, mainly originally for scholarly reasons, although obviously also some private collections as well. And there's a huge range of different organisations in our consortium, from the very, very tiny museums with 1 or 2 members of staff to the Botanic Garden or the Fitzwilliam Museum, which are the largest members of the group. And we've been working together formally as a consortium since 2012. And in the last regular year we were open, we had over 1.3 million visitors. Remember visitors? Yeah, great days, great days. And yeah, so in this session, we want to share with you some of our learning from taking our Museum Remix program online. So for the next hour or so, I'll be giving you a bit of the context around this program, how it came about, what its aims are. We'll talk a bit about what we did when we had to go online, how we work with the participants, and how we're taking what we've created now back into the museum gallery, hopefully ready for our spaces to reopen in, oh gosh, nearly just under 2 weeks, just about 2 weeks time. Yeah, so that's kind of the plan of action. And so I will just start and give you a bit of context about Cambridge and what we're doing before I hand over to my colleagues. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Cambridge. Those of you who aren't probably have this sort of image in mind. That's King's College Chapel, some classic punting on the cam, very pristine, beautiful architecture, kind of elite university. That's the kind of image, I guess, of Cambridge in the popular mind. This is kind of perhaps more of the experience you get as you're wandering around the pavements, which is closed gates. So tourists in Cambridge often ask, where is the university? And locals go, well, it's all around you. And the kind of experience of that kind of on the pavement is this. Closed gates, you can see some cool stuff happening maybe somewhere inside, but if you're not part of the university bubble, you don't go in. You just know something's happening. Here's another classic example. This is St. Cat's College. This is my absolute favourite. Not only is there a please do not enter sign kind of right there in the doorway, there are also two on either side of the gate, just to hammer home the message that this space is private. So we in the museums kind of see ourselves as the space where the wider world can meet the university. And really what we're dealing with in Cambridge is a tale of two cities. So there is that elite Cambridge University, Anglo-Ruskin University, Silicon Fen, tech going on everywhere, very prosperous. But we were ranked last year for the third time in a row, the most unequal city in the country. And kind of to give you a statistic, what that means is there is a 10-year difference in life expectancy for men living in the poorest versus the richest parts of our city. So a very lovely place to work in many ways, a very unequal place to live. And that kind of gives our work in museums a particular urgency. We want to make sure that we are kind of bringing those two cities together and being as inclusive as we possibly can. And so that's the sort of wider context in which our Museum Remix program came about. So it's kind of really just one strand in our wider work in this area. And it's about making sure the stories that we tell in our galleries are the ones that our audiences want to see. And so, yeah, we've been working over the past 2 years now with members of our communities and our audiences to have a really good think and dig in deep about what stories are being told in our spaces, and then hand over the reins to people to tell the stories that make sense to them, the stories that they want to see. And in this particular program, we have a slight eye on maybe younger adults, students, early career artists, anybody that kind of is wanting to make change. And it began in 2018, where we worked with Sonia Dyer, who is an amazing writer, artist practitioner, to design what was essentially a workshop format. So 2-day workshop, we brought 20 or so people into several of our museums, and they went around, spoke to museum staff, and kind of did a bit of a mystery shop, essentially, of our galleries, and then presented back to staff. And then the year later, we took it a step further. We invited our volunteer tour guides who deliver LGBTQ+ history tours in the galleries to lead teams to create a pop-up exhibition in 2 days. So it was a sort of crazy art attack, very intense, really, really fascinating. How can we better tell LGBTQ plus histories in our gallery spaces? And this is where the remixing bit comes in. So essentially the challenge was, can you reimagine some of these objects? Can you write new interpretation for them? Can you present them in new ways? So through these 2 workshops, working with our participants, oh, hang on, I've skipped ahead. So yes, I mentioned a pop-up exhibition. If you want to go and explore the labels and the artworks that they created, if you follow that QR code, you'll see why I've gone really intense on the QR code later in this talk. But yes, there's a digital version of that exhibition available on our website if you want to go and explore it. So on to the approach. And this was something that we developed with the participants to kind of guide our practice. It's kind of about honesty, openness, dialogue, and listening, and creative storytelling. And I just wanted to pick up slightly on 2 of those things and why they're particularly important for us as university museums. So listening, the idea of this being an exercise in listening is, I think, really important for us. We're part of the University of Cambridge. We are used to being the people on the platform. And so having this experience of just sitting and listening and understanding what the groups, what the audiences are telling us and acting on that has been really important, I think, in kind of pushing our thinking forward, and also being open when we don't know things, that we're not always the best people to have the answers, that knowledge comes in many different forms. We're great at academic research, but we're not able to speak to all experiences. And the second is the creative element, and it's sort of, in a similar way, it undercuts some of those dynamics that are just naturally created when you're in a university collection. You know, we're about facts and research. We present our objects in a very traditional academic way in some cases. You know, they are designed to give you a kind of broad sweep of natural history, or tell you about fossils, or take you through the history of art. They're not, on the surface, social history collections. So that makes it kind of seem on the surface perhaps a bit difficult to talk about more kind of inclusive stories necessarily beyond, say, the science. We're very focused on our academic disciplines. But kind of that creativity, recreating objects, reinterpreting objects, remixing them, gives the reins, the kind of creative reins, over to the participants, and just again reinforces that idea that there are many different forms of knowledge, and creates a different pathway for audiences to engage with art collections as well. So it's a lot of words, but I just wanted to give you an example of one of the things that the team created in our workshop in 2019, because I think it better explains what I'm saying. So I am a classicist by background, so any excuse to get a classical sculpture in. This is a sculpture called the Sleeping Hermaphroditus. It's an ancient Roman sculpture. It was found in Rome. It's now in the Louvre. And it shows the child of the god Hermes and the goddess Aphrodite. And basically the story goes, a nymph was so in love with Hermaphroditus that they physically merged to create a being with male and female characteristics. And this sculpture shows Hermaphroditus having a nap. And there's a traditional way in classical art history that this sculpture has been explored, and it's quite prurient. It's kind of been talked about as if it's a clever joke, clever dinner party joke for the Romans. There's this beautiful female nude, you walk around, you get a bit of a surprise on the other side, which maybe tells you more about art historians than the Romans. But essentially this kind of approach to what is a depiction of a gender non-conforming body, an intersex body, led to the university rejecting the offer of a plaster cast of this sculpture back in the 1850s on the grounds that it was not appropriate for women and students to see. And so it wasn't incorporated into the collection, ultimately that ended up at our Museum of Classical Archaeology. And so it's a gap in their collection, which is really there to teach the breadth of classical sculpture through plaster casts. And looked at in another way, this is essentially a story about one kind of body being deemed inappropriate for display in a gallery that is full of nudes, which is really interesting. And so our Museum Remix team recreated that sculpture using air dry clay with a twist. And it's really challenging. Why are you responding to this body in a particular way? And so you're invited to go and lift that red cloth, and when you do, there's a mirror kind of saying, why are you so interested in this? And what was amazing is we now have that on display in our gallery. So Hermaphroditus has kind of come into the collection kind of metaphorically, and is there to tell that story to visitors and to talk about that absence. So that was pretty much where we were at the last time we spoke at the British Museum Conference in 2019. The pop-up exhibition had gone on tour. We'd popped it up at a few community events and bits of programming, and we were really looking forward to getting some of those stories into the galleries and perhaps doing another workshop. And then, of course, March 2020 happened, and we were all sent home, where we all still are. And we took the program online. So I don't know, you guys, it feels like a long time ago now, but do you remember these? This is very summer 2020, Grayson's Art Club, Museum from Home. There was a lot of projects going on about getting creative during lockdown. And we thought, well, what if people could remix from home? And so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Jasmine, who's going to tell you how we took Museum Remix online.
Hello. I'm just getting my buttons for slide clicking. Hello, everyone. I am Jasmine, and yes, I work at the Fitzwilliam Museum, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we did. So initially, I was involved in Museum Remix as a tour guide for the Bridging Binaries LGBTQ+ tours at the Fitzwilliam Museum. There's a picture of that project. So that was, 2019. And I was asked to participate in Museum Remix that year by giving the other participants a briefing on some of the objects from my tour. And then, as you can see, getting crafty with them and creating some interesting artworks in response to their stories. So I think there we've got some plates in the style of some plates that were made to a dinner service commemorating Queen Anne and the rest of the Stuart family. And we also have some moving cardboard puppets of the artists and curators, Charles Ricketts and Charles Shannon. And they were then part of an animated puppet film, which I have to say is the first time I've ever done anything like that. So that was exciting. So in 2020, I came on board in more of a facilitator role. And so I saw the project from start to finish. What we did this year was ask curators of each of the collections to identify a series of objects that might have unheard stories behind them. This was quite an open brief, so we got a huge range of objects, and you can see some of those here. We did use some of the objects from the Bridging Binaries tours as well, but this was a good opportunity to look more in depth at some of the stories about race and class, gender and disability in our collections. When we identified a series of objects, we asked staff at the museums to do a brief object talk video for us, which we tried to keep to about 5 minutes or under in length. And the speaker would tell us the object's unheard narrative, explaining an aspect of the object's history that might not fit onto the label or might not be known by most of the people who view it. So this was when I first got involved by designing a logo for the project and to bookend the videos with. There it is. It's usually animated, but I couldn't make this one animated for some reason. And editing and annotating the videos to make them a bit more fun and engaging to watch. I don't know about you, but little cartoon figures made concentrating on a story about a famous archaeologist a lot easier for me to pay attention to and understand. So that was kind of my thinking behind making these strange little animations that went on top of it. So my experience of doing this was quite interesting because I'm not by trade a videographer or animator, but the crafty and homemade DIY approach to the project was kind of a central theme and really part of the spirit of Remix, so I think it worked. We wanted to make this project something that anyone could get involved in, no matter their creative ability or background, really. And during lockdown, there had been a real renewed enthusiasm for DIY tasks and crafting, and I think people were very open to learning new skills and trying something new. We wanted to provide an experience for people where they could engage with some meaningful and thought-provoking material and still feel connected to the museums from home. So in addition to these object videos, George made a series of challenge videos fulfilling the role of a sort of quartermaster issuing creative tasks to our prospective volunteers. Here she is. These videos were then dispersed through the social media channels of the museums as a kind of open call for creative responses to the objects. Setting the challenges was quite exciting, as there was also a considerable time pressure element to it. They lasted about 4 weeks each, and while we were doing it, we kept making and releasing more videos as the project went on to keep things interesting and sort of constantly moving. I learned so much about all the different objects by editing these videos, and we have a little clip of some of the videos here.
Help us embark on an experiment in museum storytelling. So our curators have picked some objects, and some of which have challenging histories, and we are inviting you to remix them, to respond to them creatively.
The object I've chosen is a mask made and worn by men of the Igbo people in southern Nigeria more than 100 years ago.
The object I will be talking about is part of the west pediment of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. It's a statue of a woman elbowing a centaur in the face.
I picked these two objects because they were each excavated by archaeologists who were trailblazers in their own ways, and whose stories have remained largely unheard.
There were 2 women on this expedition, and it was so unusual at the time that they had to apply to the Foreign Office for permission to travel on the expedition.
In the 18th century, both disabled bodies and queer sexualities were described in terms of defect, deviance, and abnormality.
So, you might want to think a little bit more about why aren't objects like these on display, and what impact do you think that has?
Who counts as a scientist? Why do we seem to think that the person who looks through the microscope is more important than the person who makes the slides?
How do we feel about this sculpture? How should it be displayed? And how can we illuminate and explore complex and difficult histories?
Why does my deep dive from Elcock slides to pink beaches make me so excited? Why is pink sand just cool? To me, it's proof that nature is bright and fun, that nature is colourful, diverse, queer.
We're trying to find the underground factories where Germany's V weapons are being made. You know, doodlebugs and the V2 rockets. Section Officer Dorothy Garrard reporting for duty.
You wouldn't recognise if I was a warrior unless you dressed me up in your crude costume and told me to bare my teeth.
I felt my body all covered in flames when the centaurs had showed me no grace.
My metal casing contracts and creaks. I feel brittle, exposed.
In the quarry, dig it up right now. Dig it up. Dig it up right now. Come on, poor man, dig it up.
So that was the first challenge videos, but that was also a preview. We're a little bit ahead of the media that we got back. So each of those challenges was issued to get a different type of media back. And the first challenge was audio, and we had a lot of really interesting responses, and they were songs, poems, and abstract soundscapes. And the next challenge was 2D art, and we got a range of collages, drawings, and a zine. And you saw those in that clip just then with some of the audio submissions layered on top. And then we also did our last challenge, which was film-based, and we received some really interesting interpretations here as well. So there's just a couple of screenshots from those videos. And these are all available to view on the Museum Remix website as well. So if you do want to go and have a look at those. So throughout the challenges, we kept promoting the project on social media, and we had 2 live curator Q&As about some of the objects. These are really exciting live events where people could find out some more in-depth information about some of the objects. As we received the submissions, they were given to our 3 guest curators, who were Marenka Thompson-Odlum, Lucian Stevenson, and Barney Brown. They picked for each challenge respectively their favorites of those objects and created videos of them talking about their final selections. These objects would then become the ones that are later going to be accessible from the galleries, which I think George is going to talk about a bit later. And then something else I did in connection with Museum Remix this year was to gather the Bridging Binaries volunteers and have them record audio versions of parts of their tours. This was really great because we'd been looking for a way to use the Bridging Binaries material during the museum closure. And while we can't do big group tours even when we're open, so this has immortalized some really excellent stories for the museums. And this combined with the remix material is also so significant to me in that you don't have to sign up to attend a tour just due to personal interest. Any visitor can access this material at any point. And this means that we're hopefully getting far less of a self-selecting interested minority and doing a much better job of sharing some of these interesting and important stories with our casual visitors. I think it sends out a really good message of our willingness to engage with more difficult or sensitive topics, such as objects with histories of racism or colonialism, but it also enables us to be more celebratory of our objects with LGBTQ significance or uplifting the voices and stories of disabled people throughout history, for example. In all these things, Museum Remix shows that there are so many different ways to engage with these stories creatively and experimentally. And we're also showcasing the possibilities of going beyond audience engagement and into actual audience participation, creating a sense of visitor ownership of the institutions and local and personal and community significance. And I think these are all ways of which we can be more outwardly welcoming to all of our audiences. And for that reason, I'm really pleased with the project and proud of all the work that's been put into it and what's come out of it. And that is me. Thank you.
Is it me now, Hannah? I can never remember.
It is you now.
It is me. I just clicked and it says participants or volunteers. As mentioned earlier, I'm Nikki. I really liked the slides Hannah put up showing some closed doors around Cambridge, which is very relevant to my role because my role is opening doors, project coordinator. So actually this, in fact, all versions of Remix have been really important to the stream of funding in the project that I work on, which is creating opportunities for different people to get involved. Now, I actually participated for the first version of Museum Remix. I was also a participant on it, not really knowing what to experience. But it was something that was really eye-opening and really sort of set me on a learning journey into sort of understanding more about the different collections that are hidden within our museums and the different interpretation. So one thing I'm talking about is how we shifted from it being very much a participatory workshop to a online volunteering setup. Everyone is clearly sort of moving towards remote volunteering these days. We are, sort of living through a period of time where people still want to do volunteering and want to get involved. And lots of museums in the past have really shuddered at the thought of the concept of digital or remote or virtual volunteering, which in fact, a lot of us have been doing it for a really long time already, just not calling it that. So it's really interesting that we can actually put a sort of a label on this now, I guess. So I'm just going to talk about the shift that we made. So participation and why rethink it. as I mentioned in the past, the program that I got involved with in the first remix, which was 2018, I think. It was very much a workshop version where people would come along to the sessions and be with us for 2 days. They would have applied to be a participant, so would have sort of sent in almost an expression of interest, and participants were picked out of the number of people who applied. And it was clear that as we were starting to move to the whole program onto online, that just wouldn't work in the same way. So we talked about whether we could actually shift it to being a volunteering version. In the past, the participants were also remunerated by, I think they were given vouchers for Amazon. Hannah is nodding at me, so I know that's right. So because the reason why is because we felt that they were investing and involving themselves in such an intensive way, and really coming along on a really impressive journey with us, that we wanted to recognise that and get them to understand that we recognise and appreciate their efforts they put in for us. But again, this was different. The way it moved online was different, and it was less about a group participatory program where everyone is coming together and feeding in and working together to create an outcome, and more about someone's personal journey, someone's personal reaction to the objects that we're putting out there, and their own research in their own time. So it's very much an individual nature. So we had to think about it, and we thought, yeah, I think we could potentially make this into a volunteering role online. How we recruited, we have, with University of Cambridge Museums, we utilise a recruitment platform which lots of charities and organisations use, called Volunteer Makers. And it's been described as like a Facebook for volunteering within your institution, but I don't really like that setup. It's basically a way in which somebody can create an account with us. They can tick all the different things that they're interested in. So they might be interested in LGBTQ+ history, they might be interested in archaeology, they might be interested in botanical garden, and they can tick all those things. And every time a role becomes available, every time a museum or the Botanic Garden thinks, oh, I've got a really interesting and exciting volunteer role here, it can get uploaded onto our Volunteer Makers website. And the individuals who have shown an interest in those areas will get notified will get a notification to say that they can sign up for the role. And it's just basically a really simple sort of platform where users can engage easily and quickly with different roles, as opposed to having to go through a really long recruitment process, which I know some of us have had to experience in the past, which can be quite painful. So what we did is each month when a new challenge came online, we put that on our Volunteer Makers website, and people were able to participate through that, so join up and get further information. What did this mean? It meant that we could engage with loads and loads of people throughout the project. After a little bit of sort of filtering down, I think we engaged with about 48 people. I don't think we had 48 submissions, but we definitely had 48 people who engaged with the program. We had a lot more than that. We get an awful lot of people who we like to think of as click happy. So every time a new challenge or a role comes up, they'll click, so they're interested. Yes, I'm interested in that. And it's about those people that progressed through a little further with the program. We're able to engage in different ways. So we were able to use Volunteer Makers as a way, that remix on Volunteer Makers as a way to sort of see people through onto potentially other volunteering projects. And I do know that there are some people that have come to us through the remix program who have heard about it, signed up to Volunteer Makers, and have thought, well, this sounds interesting, and then actually used it as a springboard into other volunteering opportunities within the UCM, which is really exciting. And it also meant that we were able to engage with people who were already signed up to Volunteer Makers, who were more interested in just the general museum stuff. Jasmine mentioned before about how the labels and the QR codes dotted around the museum, which we'll talk about later, they mean that it's not necessarily just a self-selecting group of people who are interested in sort of museum remix or LGBTQ plus or alternative histories. Anyone can engage with it, and that's kind of the case for volunteer makers as well, because we already had probably about 700 people signed up to the volunteer makers website, and so all those 700 people would then be notified to say that this project was happening, and from that we may very well have had people who perhaps hadn't understood what something like Museum Remix was about, or perhaps hadn't understood that there was this type of program, or there were these type of histories available. And from that, it sparks an interest. Somebody might look at it and think, well, I don't know what this is fascinating. And then that sparks their interest for the future. And we know this has had an effect. I've had people who have volunteered with us for a really long time, who are on volunteer makers, who have then become involved in Museum Remix, and it's really opened their eyes to the type of opportunities that might be out there for them. I also know from that there have been some volunteers that have come to me and wanted to know more information, and have realised that there's gaps in their knowledge that they didn't know that they had, and have asked if there is any training that we could provide for them. And actually the university are really pretty good at providing things like trans awareness training and LGBTQ plus training for people, and they allow us to sign up our volunteers for that as well. So that's a really positive outcome. So that all sounds really great. However, it was a little bit of a faff, I'm not going to lie to you. It was really great that we could open this out as a volunteer opportunity, but the user journey of signing up to volunteer makers and then having to click through, sent the link from the Remix website, then clicking through onto another link and then submitting in another way, it was a bit fiddly. So if we were to do it again, I think we'd potentially think about different ways in which the user journey can be more streamlined and made a little bit more friendly. But at the same time, it did enable us to engage in lots of different ways with people who we perhaps wouldn't have engaged with in the past, and have since then sort of shifted along to another volunteer journey with us. Little bit of feedback for us, which is nice, and I'm really glad Hannah's put the nice feedback on. Not that there would be any nasty, of course, no. It seems like a really interesting, engaging project that helped me reignite some creativity, which had burned out over lockdown, which is actually really important. I think creativity has kept a lot of people going. Even me, I'm not very creative at all. In fact, I'm not creative at all. However, it got me thinking, and it got me really interested in the different types of stories that are out there, and I really enjoyed listening to what people were coming out with. And here, a nice creative and political during lockdown. Ooh, interesting, political during lockdown. Who'd have thought? So it was really engaging for us. It was really nice for us to see what's coming back, and I was really glad to see that different types of volunteers from across our community were getting involved. So I think that's me done.
Thanks, Nikki. Okay, so I can see that we're so overexcited, we're running over time. So I'm just going to say, if you want to go and explore that community created content that we've mentioned, it's on our website, museums.cam.ac.uk. And then learning curves, ask us about that in the Q&A. I'm going to hand straight over to George to talk about what we're doing next.
Great, thanks very much, Hannah. So yes, as both Nikki and Jasmine have touched on, one of the key questions that we had when running this remix is, well, what do we do now with all of this content that we've got? How can we make sure that, one, it's viewed by a wide audience? How can we get out of a self-selecting audience of people who are able to access the content at a particular time in a particular space? How can we sort of make this accessible to all? And one of the ways that we're going to try this is by putting labels actually in the galleries themselves. All of the content is available on our website, of course, but that knocks out the casual visitor who's just rocked up to a museum and gone, hey, here's an object. And if they don't know to look at the website, they won't know that there are these extra, stories to find. So in the spirit of lockdown and making things at home, I will be sharing with you a label that will be going into a gallery very soon. At the moment, they're all on my desk instead of actually being in the museums or in an office. And hopefully my cats won't eat them first. So we've been trying, we've tried in the past to use enhanced labels to tell additional stories outside of the traditional, very small museum label stuck on a wall format. So we've used QR codes to link to images, video content, even sort of longer essay content. We've used NFC stickers, which are very cool, magic-like, tap your phone, link appears kind of content, and short links to make this content accessible for people who have smartphones, or for people who can access in a browser, or even just remember a short link better than www.museums.cam.ac.uk/discover, all of that. And one of the things that we really wanted to look at was how these different kinds of technologies were interacted with by the visitor, but also how staff were comfortable in explaining how these enhanced labels worked. And that's been a bit of a learning curve for all of us, I think, because it's very well and good to put a label into a gallery with these little icons on it. But if nobody knows what they mean, nobody's going to find your content. And when the first time that I did an enhanced label project like this, it was prior to the pandemic. And I was being told at the time, well, QR codes, they're over, they're passé. And now I think it's a really interesting time to run it again, because we are all so familiar with scanning every 5 seconds everywhere we go. So we're keeping them for a bit. Sorry, not that sorry. We're also using the NFC stickers still. That's what the little phone with the circular bars is all about, just to see how they compare. What we're going to do is look at the analytics behind them and find out how each one compares, and then that can inform our enhanced labels going forwards. We're also making sure that for people who don't have smartphones, can't explore the content in galleries, that all the content is going to be available on the website, and that we're showing people how to access that content from home at their leisure. And that's all of that is part of making this content as widely accessible as possible. If you can see the label now, what you can also see is that we have a short title of the content, but also a little brief description of what it is. And that's important. When we're in our museums, the Wi-Fi connectivity may not be great, mobile signal may not be great. They are going into all kinds of different buildings. And what we really need is for our visitors to know what it is that they're going to get when they use one of these links. And that really is partly so that we're not using up swaths of data from everyone, but also to keep that trust with our audience. You know, we're not going to ask them to stand there and for 5 minutes whilst a giant video downloads over terrible Wi-Fi or something. They know it's going to be their choice. The power is in their hands. The other thing that we're doing is creating these little postcards with the same sort of things on them that we're going to use to advertise the Museum Remix labels in the galleries. Therefore, our staff as well to point out and wave at people because they look really nice, frankly. It was important to us to reflect in our labels that this is a project that crosses all of our museums, and to make these labels stand out and try and just sort of break up with this preconceived notions of what a museum is and should be. You know, as Hannah was mentioning earlier, we're very, very aware that we are part of this grand institution. What we wanted to do was start breaking that down and start saying, well, actually, don't worry about what that institution is. Take a look at this content. It's very important, and it's for you. And it's also a little time for us to break with the idea of what a museum label should be. I don't really believe in anything that should be something just because it's always been done that way. And we're having a go. We're experimenting. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of this, because the next iteration of this project will be based on what we find out from running these labels in our galleries. And my hope is that there's going to be a lot more enhanced labels in galleries, but that also brings with it its own questions. We're mindful of the fact that when you have an enhanced label like this, well, what goes on the front of the label where somebody just walks in and sees it, and then what content is behind the digital link? Does that then present a kind of hierarchical structure or power status really between the two? So these are the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking ourselves, and these are the kinds of experiments that we're going to run, hopefully many, many more of in the future. And what we find out is this is just the start of it. I'm very excited. Hannah, back to you, I guess.
Very, very excited. Thank you everyone for listening to our presentation. I think we're going to hand back to Afzal now to see if we have any questions.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for those questions. I mean, the presentation, we have one question. It says, regarding Jasmine's slides about museum remix, what are you hoping in a post-COVID world for the project? Are you intending for it to be a museum experience in itself, as opposed to a pure addition to a straightforward physical visit to the museum?
That is a big question.
That is, yeah.
To field it.
I can have a stab. In that I would really hope it becomes part of the museum experience. I think one of the great things that we've got with digital tools is that we can start bringing in a really exciting collaborative dialogue with our visitors. I'm not saying that it won't be many, many tricky things to work out there, but this is an opportunity to do so. So yes, is my hope. But I can't say what will happen.
Can I just pitch in something as well, which is one of the things that I think we would never have done if COVID hadn't happened, was firstly produce all those videos. I mean, we produced kind of, for us, a huge number of videos, given that we were coming basically from, well, not quite a standing start, but close to one. Is that we put out something that was so unpolished in some ways, although it had Jasmine's beautiful animations and annotations on top, but museum staff were talking from their homes, and I think that kind of helped demystify the experience and perhaps break down kind of, if we're thinking about museum experience, you know, it's showing that we're all here in our slightly stuzzy kitchens or whatever, on our landings in my case, and you know, we can, those stories about those objects are so powerful in a way that we can talk about them without the objects even being there, and I think that's a really important kind of aspect of it, that demystification of our work.
And Hannah, can I jump in there as well? Because I think that was super important for the participants as well, to see that I'm coming at it as somebody who's a self-confessed non-creative person, but seeing our colleagues chatting almost to us via a video from their homes with, you know, cats walking past, children coming in, made me think actually it's okay if I'm not completely creative, and I still can participate in a rudimentary way if I want to, and I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people get really bogged down with the concept of, especially the university museums, where it's very academic, it's very posh, you know, I've got to be an expert in doing something. I can't get involved, this is too scary. not the case. And I think that this version of Remix has gone a long way in helping people participate. And it's made me sort of almost leapfrog into another thought of, if we were to do this again, would we go back to having it as a participatory programme? And would we be encouraging all those people who showed an interest in Museum Remix this time round, you know, there's 48, 49 people, would we be encouraging them to get involved and, you know, sort of maybe show an interest in it, instead of, again, just accepting those self-selecting people who already have an interest in it? Interesting. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I just thought my cat demonstrated very much the at-home vibe. I think I've said before that in a way, this has opened up Remix in a way that I didn't think it could be opened up. And it's really, really, I've been absolutely impressed and astounded by what interaction that we got back. And I know that there is immense value in being there and being sort of having sort of tactical experiences, but I would love to see a blend of both of them. Just for the fact that I think for some people who felt that they possibly could not interact in person, this is offered a way to interact on their own terms, in their own way. Apologies for the cat.
That's all right. We have a really nice comment that's come in. It says, when it comes to digital, you've gone up above and beyond in sector. Great job. And one last question we have is, are these digital assets being accessioned or saved alongside the collection?
That is a great question. And it is something that we're absolutely exploring. We have spoken with our colleagues at the University Library, who have been collecting kind of a sort of a repository of a kind of the coronavirus experience, but it absolutely is something that we think should be the end point of all of this, is that it is part of our collection in some sense, whether that's accessioned, whether that's it's recorded on our databases, but that absolutely community content isn't something that is a nice to have or a bolt on. It should be kind of part of our core business. And I know that's something George is really passionate about as well. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, George.
I think you've summed it up. I think going forwards, we need to have this content in our museums, frankly. And I'm very, very proud that Museum Remix is actively looking to see how this can be done in a way that we can take forwards into the future.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left. If there's anything you want to discuss, we've run out of questions, but anything you want to say?
Well, everyone's smiling. I have a question for everyone, which is, what is your favourite submission and why that we received last year? I know it's really hard.
Can I go with the Quarry song? You heard a little snippet of the Quarry song before, and it becomes a really, really severe earworm after a period of time. And at the beginning, I was like, well, I'm not sure about this earworm. That's getting a little bit frustrating. And now I love it. And it's just regular shower singing material for me. It's a good one. Listen to it. It's good.
So this is a song that was inspired by an archive photo in the Sedgwick Museum, which showed 3 men around a newly discovered fossil. And kind of the story was about what is the dynamic between these men from different social backgrounds, and what might Arthur Hardman, the quarryman, who's likely been doing most of the actual backbreaking work, be thinking about the object. And yeah, and then we just got this beautiful song. Oh, questions. Afzal has just put in the chat, we have some questions.
Yeah, we just this is quite a good question, I think. Do you have any tips for teaching yourself to edit and illustrate videos as beautifully as you did, Jasmine?
So yeah, it was a strange process. But I started off just doing it on my phone. because iPhones come with iMovie, it turns out, and I didn't know that, but I discovered it was there. And I was just playing around with it, basically thinking like, how, what can I do? And I actually made a video for one of the other presentations we did where I kind of explained how I started off making a stop motion video. And basically I just took like 100 photos of rocks moving around the table in different orders and then just pasted them all together and sped it up on iMovie. And then I realized I'd created an animation. So then I applied the same thing to drawings with no background on Photoshop. But to be honest, a lot of it was playing around with stuff, and also this project being, I guess, how it is with the kind of like DIY ethos made it possible for me to like learn all the way through the project. And I think you do see that in the first video I did, which was actually the Barrington Quarry Rhino video, it's a lot more lo-fi than some of the ones I did towards the end, where I started to really get into the swing of it and wanted to make these, huge animations just throughout the whole video. So I think you can see that in the project, but also like that's very much what it's about. It was just like, a few weeks of learning stuff, Googling stuff and trying new things. And there is a tutorial for absolutely everything these days.
Awesome. And I'll just end on a really nice comment someone has said. I'm really excited to take a more thorough look into the projects you spoke about because they sound fab. Thank you all for a really good presentation. And I think we're going to end on that. Thank you very much for this presentation. It was very enlightening. And thank you very much for joining. We have 2 events left and I will see you then. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you so much.